There is a very thin line between fiction and reality sometimes, and this is one of those stories that will make you wonder if we're not all acting a script. I mean, how do you explain that one minute a guy was on his way to being roasted for lunch by some hungry cannibals, and the next minute he was sitting on the throne as the king of the tribe? Well, get ready for an exciting adventure that will make your jaw drop as we look at one of the most unbelievable events that happened in the last century. In 1904, a sailor ended up on an island of cannibals. They wanted to eat him, but he managed to become the leader of the tribe. On the 23rd of October, 1875, the hero of our unbelievable story was born to a Swedish family. And it won't be a crime to doubt how his story ended, because at the start of his life, he would never have expected it himself. The guy named Carl Emil Pettersson was one of the 6 children born to Carl Wilhelm and Johanna Pettersson, and he had to take responsibility for himself and the family from the age of 17. As soon as his father left home around the early 1890s, he also went to sea, where he started working as a crew member before he eventually became a sailor. However, most of his voyages were as turbulent as his early life was. A lot of times, he had suffered shipwrecks, and he was fortunate enough to survive all of them. Well, let's say that those shipwrecks were preparing him for the big event which was going to change the course of his life forever. The year Carl turned 31, the next decades of his life were about to take a new shape, and it all started on Christmas morning in 1904. Pettersson and other crew members set sail on a sea vessel named Duke Johann Albrecht, and the journey kicked off well. But things took a different turn when a huge storm started around evening. The storm grew wild, and it soon became so unbearable that the ship succumbed to the force and was eventually overturned. No doubt the storm was so serious that many could have lost their lives. However, Carl's past experiences with shipwrecks probably came in handy again, and by daybreak, he was already ashore. You can imagine his sigh of relief when he realized that he was safe again, but unknown to him, he was in some serious mess this time. Though he was on dry land, the place he found himself was on the island of Tabar, a small patch of land in Papua New Guinea. If you've ever heard of that place, the kind of people that inhabit the island should not be strange to you. Tabar Island is actually a land of cannibals, and the sailor finding himself here could only mean one thing. It was going to be a big feast for the tribesmen that night. Since it was a small island, it didn't take a lot of time for the islanders to know that a stranger, or what they would call a meal, had just landed. So, they bundled him up, made a fire at the village square, and they started jubilating at the thought of a feast. For Carl, you can be sure that he must have given up, and he would never expect anything to shift the appointment he had with death that day. But surprisingly, he was wrong. As their custom was, the tribesmen presented him, their new catch, to the king, but instead of hunger, he was filled with admiration. On this day, Carl's blue eyes and blonde hair were his saviors. The king, who had not seen any human with such features, was filled with awe, and instead of feasting on the guy, he ordered that he should be treated as a specialty. The feast, where he was supposed to be roasted and served for dinner, became his welcome party to the island, and a few days later, he became popular on the island as Strong Charlie. This was because of his tall physique and his ability to get things done. In fact, because of this unique physique, the king's daughter, Princess Singdo, fell in love with him. Apart from his unique features, Carl Pettersson won the hearts of the islanders with his knowledge of trading and agriculture. He started teaching them the civilized way of farming, and he also oversaw major trades between Tabar Island and other neighboring islands. Before the end of his first year on the island, he already owned a coconut farm, and he exported copra, coconuts, and other crops on behalf of the island. In no time, he took the island's trade from 0 to 1,000,000, and he made the whole island indebted to him, though it probably wasn't his plan all along. Well, 2 years after he changed the island for good, the king decided to allow him to marry his daughter, and since the princess already liked Carl from the start, it was easy peasy. and the wedding took place in 1907. But what he probably didn't know was that the wedding was about to take him to another level he would never have dreamt of. 1 year after the wedding, the king died, and a dream he never had came true in the same year. Since Princess Singdo was the king's only child, the next option was to crown her husband the new king. Now, it was even easier because Karl Pettersson already had a good record with the people, and his presence on the island had caused a major change prior to the king's death. So, was there any objection to his selection as the new king? Definitely none. He was crowned the king in 1908, and his life took a whole new turn. His farming business boomed even more, and he increased his estate with 2 plantations. The first one was Maragon on Simbury Island, and the second was Londolovet on Lihir Group of Islands. One thing that earned him more respect among the islanders and those in other islands was the fact that he was very respectful of local customs, and he showed concern for his employees. In these cannibal islands, such acts were very strange and unusual, and this made King Karl more honorable among the people. This reverence which the islanders had for him made it easy for him to get them to see the darkness in cannibalism. In a few years of being king, Karl was able to rid the island of the act of cannibalism, and he got the people to completely adopt productive farming and trading. His reign continued for about a decade and a half, and his marriage to Princess Singdo already yielded 9 children. However, one of these kids died at infancy as a result of postpartum fever, and Queen Singdo herself died in 1921 due to an unknown cause. A year after the death of the queen, and homesick Karl decided to travel back to Sweden for a while. Surprisingly, the story of his new life had made it to Sweden, and everyone knew that their most beloved sailor was now the king of an island of cannibals. Sounds scary, huh? A Swedish writer and researcher had come across Karl when he was making his research about a book he was writing in the early 1920s. The writer was making a memoir of the strange islands around them, and he was shocked to find Karl on the throne in one of these islands. Karl told him the story of how he found himself on the island, and he also narrated every event that led to him being king. So the Swedish writer took pictures of him with his wife and family and rushed back home to share what he just saw. Thinking about it, it was indeed better that the writer went home to narrate the event before Karl later decided to travel to Sweden. I mean, just imagine him standing at his mother's door almost 20 years after he was lost, only to tell a cock and bull story of how he was now a king of cannibals. You bet they would think he had lost his mind. Well, thank goodness for the Swedish writer who went before him. His journey back home yielded good fruit. In fact, he met a new wife, an Anglo-Swedish woman named Jessie Louisa Simpson. Karl got married to the woman in Sweden, and they left for the island together in 1923. Karl repeated his wedding to Jessie the local way, and she was called Queen Jessie as they both continued to lead the island together. However, the few months which Karl spent in Sweden had taken a major toll on the island. In his absence, the island's productivity dwindled, and it was close to bankruptcy. So King Karl had no choice but to pick things from scratch and start all over again. He tried to build his estates and farms again, but things were hard because he and his new wife suffered from malaria. The bad investments and failing market conditions also made it hard for him to recover, and this poor productivity continued for a while until a new compensation came his way. A compensation which still lasts until today. In his plantation on the Simbury Island, he discovered a gold nugget, and it looked like it was strategically placed there by some higher power to cover for the failing agricultural system. So during his reign, the island became one of the major custodians of gold in the world, and even now, the world's largest gold deposit is found on Tabar Island. No doubt, this discovery changed his life forever, and his fortunes never remained the same. I mean, you know what it means to be the king of an island which sits on the largest gold deposit in the world, right? Yeah, Karl was in some serious generational wealth, and he would bless the day he found himself floating at the shore of the island. Well, with that discovery, he thought that it was time for him to leave the island and settle in a more civilized place. Think of a place where his new wealth would be more useful to him. However, his wife had to leave first because she had been down with malaria. She left for Stockholm, where she eventually died on the 19th of May, 1935, due to complications resulting from malaria and cancer. Shortly after the death of Queen Jessie, Carl was finally ready to leave the island. So, in 1935, he handed over the leadership of the island to his first son, and he left the island for good. With the wealth he already acquired and the fortune that would still come his way from the island in the future, he was ready to live life in some of the biggest places in the world. And guess what? He could not think of any other place than the location where his wrecked ship was first headed, Sydney, Australia. He moved to Australia to put the Island King thingy behind him and start a new life. Of course, living was quite easier and better for him after acquiring huge fortunes and reigning for almost 3 decades as the king of the island. Also, with his son still in control of the island, he was still indirectly in the helm of affairs, and there was no end to the proceeds that would come to him from the island. However, his new life did not really last for so long. 2 years after he moved to Australia, he was gripped by the hands of a serious ailment. He ravaged in this sickness for months until he died of a heart attack on the 12th of May, 1937. Sadly, he may have passed on in a tragic way before he even got to enjoy the fortune he acquired from the island. However, his impact on the island transcended decades and still remains in history till today. In fact, the legends speak so well of him, and the people of Tabar Island still remember King Carl Peterson as a legendary figure who brought prosperity and peace to their land. Also, his story became popular in the 1930s, and several Swedish and German newspapers wrote different articles about his adventure. Most importantly, his story has inspired a lot of fictional writings and drama, which has led many people to even dig deeper into his real story. In the end, his story is one that has brought the world to a conclusion that anything may be possible on the blue planet. You just may never know when you'll probably find yourself in the most mysterious place, surrounded by the strangest events. To put that better, people who live a normal life today may just become the hero of an unbelievable story, like this one tomorrow. All right, now we have come to the end of our jaw-dropping adventure. Hope you enjoyed this video. What do you think about this interesting story? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you have any questions about this story, you can ask in the comment section as well.